Hello, this is my globalized project for Rene Descartes versus Plato. The school of thought would be rationalism. So to begin with, I'd like to go over rationalism. Rationalism was a school of thought or a philosophical movement during the Age of Reason around the 17th to 18th century. This can be dated back to people as Plato. He's kind of like the first rationalist, which he was alive around 420, 430 BC. He believed in innate knowledge and logic and reasoning instead of sense or empirical data, which was really like all of his beliefs are pretty similar to many modern philosophers today. So the person that Plato is going to be compared to is Descartes. Descartes was born in France, lived between 1956 and 1650. He's considered to be the founding father of Western modern philosophy through the ways he obtained knowledge and so forth. He wasn't really heavily influenced by many other philosophers, if any at all really, by the way he kind of broke down information and kind of stripped himself of knowledge. We'll talk about that more later. For Plato, he was born in Athens, lived between 427 through 347 BC. Considered the first rationalist because he was heavily focused on logic and reasoning instead of empirical data. He's heavily influenced by people like Homer, Pythagoras, Socrates, and so forth, and many people before his time. Similarities between these two are, of course, heavily focused on logic and reasoning, like I said before. Both were dualists, so they both believed in the soul and the physical form, but they also both had a separate idea or concept of God or perfection, God being for Descartes and perfection being for Plato. Heavily against empirical data, so they would say senses are faulty, you can't really rely on them pretty much whatsoever. Both of them had ideas on how knowledge was obtained, but they were very different and very out there, in my opinion. So the differences between Descartes would be he believed knowledge was based on logical truths, and that they cannot be unalienable by the way, if used the way that he would would have. Um, So the way he did this was he looked at his foundation of knowledge, the very core of it, and then he would determine if something was true or false. And if one of his foundations for knowledge was false, then the things above it that he would use to conclude the other information would be false as well. Descartes, like Plato, was a dualist, but he only focuses really on the physical part and the spirit, nothing really extra along with it. He also had the idea for God, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And he doesn't really build off of previous knowledge because, like I said earlier, he looks at his core of all of his knowledge and kind of goes over that, which can then lead to more information being false. For Plato, it's a lot different, though. He didn't believe knowledge was obtained, but it was innate. My opinion, this is a little weird, but he kind of says that we recall information and that we do know since we're born. He was a dualist just like Descartes was, but for the spirit, he believed there's three parts: a tripartite, the appetite, which is food, spirit, and rational would be the reasoning. Likewise, he had a concept for God, which was more of like perfection, which came in the realm of forms, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. So, God or perfection. Plato didn't really believe in a God, but he had the idea of perfection, which came in the realm of the forms. The realm of the forms is another realm where everything is perfect, and we can only get there through logic and reasoning. In our world, we have the imitations of perfection, but none of it can be perfect. It never will be possible unless we use logic and reasoning. Then we can access the other realm. Descartes believes in a God, but doesn't really go into much detail about what God does or how he's really different, but he explains his reasoning for how God exists with the logical proof being we have a perfect idea of God, it's perfect to exist than not to exist, therefore God exists. In conclusion, Descartes and Plato are two different philosophers at very different timelines. They are both in the same school of thought, but their ideas on how we obtain knowledge and so forth are completely different. Plato kind of derives all of his information off of his previous concepts, like the allegory and cave, which kind of explains the forms. And Descartes does the complete opposite by kind of destroying all of his previous information and shaking it to the core to find unknowable truths. Their concept of substance are very similar, but the only difference is that they have a God and one is perfection, which is based on their truths. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching.